What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Our MMA Show. Ryan Moody, Jimmy Smith. Sure to have the best show we've ever had because we just talked for longer than we've ever talked leading into a program. We're
it's
here
our
to
longest
discuss
conversation, period. Just conversation.
Yeah,
We just had it.
no, that is. We probably had our longest conversation ever. I feel like we've bonded in ways we've never bonded before, Jimmy. So, leading into UFC Fight Night, Blachowicz versus Jacare, I do just want to mention that after this, the UFC takes a bit of a layoff. We do not take a layoff. We are going to have podcasts, not two, because we can't review what doesn't happen, but we are going to have two shows each week that the UFC decides to take off, and I feel like it's a much-needed rest for the UFC. It's been quite a while. Getting into this card, we are going to start with Marcus Perez and Wellington Thurman. If you remember, or if you've been a long-time listener, we joked that Thurman's first fight sounded like a presidential race from the 1900s. Perez Thurman doesn't have that same ring a bell to it. But, we've seen a lot of Thurman now. Good knees. I really like how he tries to prevent himself having his back pushed to the cage. Perez, though, looked great against Hernandez, works the body well, has good takedowns, too. I just think Perez has the experience over more quality opponents. And I feel like this will be a back-and-forth fight, but I think he's going to find a way to pull out this win. Of all the fights on this card, this one and the next one probably the most 50-50 for me as far as picking a winner.
I have to agree. So I'm just going to disagree on the pick just to be different. I like Thurman's ability to kind of slow a fight down. It's not always flashy. It's not always beautiful. But that grinding ability to wear somebody out. You talked about his knees, you talked about his pacing, his ability to get against the fence and take the energy out of his opponent. Carl Robertson, a close fight, late notice, and it might be about who controls the nerves and the pacing and their expenditure of energy when it comes to a main fight, main card, UFC type performance under the big lights. I think Thurman just might have that little bit of an edge in what I think will be a very close fight.
I'm really upset. We went through all that bonding, and then we have a rare disagreement. Like, that's not the way this is supposed to work.
Dude. It happens, man.
Moving up the card, Antonio Arroyo, Andre Munez. To me, and Arroyo is Arroyo is going against a great grappler, perhaps one of the better practitioners in the division. I think it's going to come down to takedowns. If he can stop the takedown, I think he can win on the feet. But again, this is another one where don't have a lot of actual UFC footage. These are Contender Series guys, so it's tough for me to really know which way to go. I think I'm going to go with Arroyo.
Wow, another slight disagreement. For the reasons you mentioned, Munez in this sense more experienced, 18-4 than Arroyo, and just like it did in the last fight, I think it's about who controls the pacing, gets the fight where they want it to. Both these guys big for the weight class, and that's very important. I think Munez has enough on the ground to walk through some strikes, get the takedown, and make it an ugly, dirty fight. Either he wins by submission or a late decision based on that takedown you're talking about. I think Arroyo, in order to get his game going, is going to have to take some risks on the feet. I think that leads to a takedown. I think Munez probably wins this in not a scintillating fight unless he gets a submission early, but I think it's Munez late.
Let's try this again. Charles Oliveira versus Gordon. I did not realize.
I think we agree on this one.
All right. I didn't realize that Charles Oliveira was on a 5-fight win streak here. But this is going to be a very tough fight for him. Gordon has a great right hook. Words are tough. Good wrestling. He's very battle tested. Nothing that, Oliveira hasn't seen before. But at the same time, I've always loved the slams from Charles Oliveira, by the way, and I feel like he's a little under the radar because this fight isn't being talked about, nor is that streak. But, I think this is going to come down, and we've talked about his confidence before. His wins really come down to how he's going to perform in the first round, and I don't see Gordon giving him an easy path in the first round. Gordon, I think, is a stronger fighter, obviously isn't going to look at the name of Charles Oliveira that others may, based on the names that he's fought. I mean, he's been given a pretty rough entry into the UFC. So I feel like unless Oliveira does something early, this is going to be Gordon's fight to win. And it might be one of those times where we see Oliveira really fade late.
Very interesting. Charles Oliveira was, at one point, one of those guys where I used to watch him and go, how can a guy this talented fall apart the way he does? I really thought he was going to be one of those guys where, God, he just can't put it together in the octagon. He's incredibly talented. He's versatile. He's young. Of course, he fought some murderers early on in his career, and you could argue that the UFC didn't do him any favors with the choice of opponents, but so talented, and yet would have these moments where he would seem to almost throw a fight away, like the pressure just caused him to break. Paul Felder, remember, he was owning Paul Felder. Early on in that fight, I was like, oh man, Paul Felder's getting smoked here. And then Paul Felder got on top, landed some elbows, and it was a different fight. Just completely different. He's a momentum guy, and I will agree with you in this sense. If Jared Gordon can step forward and hurt him early, it's going to be a bad night. Oliveira is not the kind of guy so far in his career who can right the ship when it starts floundering. When there's a problem, that boat starts listing, Charles Oliveira is headed to the bottom of the ocean. Now he's on a 5-fight win streak. Clay Guida, Jim Miller, some good names. The David Timur fight I thought was excellent. It's one of those things where he might have the confidence now to overcome a bad start. But the key to his fights are momentum. And if Jared Gordon can step forward early and land something big and be the bully, Charles Oliveira might just fall apart as we've seen him do in previous fights. Now, what I'm betting on is two things. Number one, he's mentally in a better place with the streak he's on right now, that'll have a reserve of confidence that if things go wrong, that he can get out of those situations. Number two, Jared Gordon is going to take a lot of risks, or at least be aggressive early, take a lot of real estate, maybe leap behind some punches, take some offensive risks in order to hurt Charles Oliveira, and Oliveira will use that to get the takedown. So I'm betting on two things, that Oliveira is more mature at this point in his career, and that stylistically, Gordon's going to take some risks that will open up his defense and allow Oliveira to get in there where he is one of the best submission artists in the game, period, end of sentence. So I think it's Charles Oliveira's fight based on those two things.
Co-main event, Shogun Rua versus Paul Craig. The one thing I really like about Craig is he tends to use his kicks to keep range a lot. And I've often wondered if he doesn't not use combos because of that. He's going against a guy that obviously is a legend, seems to have recovered from his injuries, taken a long time off, and is extremely well-rounded. When you look at this fight on paper, there's no way that you don't check just about every single box for Shogun, whether it's feet, ground. I think it's just going to have to come down to exploiting a mistake from Craig. Or the other side of this is, do we know when the cliff is going to approach Shogun? Because sometimes, especially a guy that's been through all the wars he has and all the series he has, we've seen the fall off very quick. I haven't seen anything other than the Anthony Smith fight where he just got ran through. And I think that doesn't speak anything to, the degradation of Shogun's abilities. I just think that night he went up against somebody that he wasn't as prepared for, that went 100% and quickly got him out of there. I don't know that Paul Craig can provide that same aggression and that same pace and that same instinct. But it's going to be interesting to see when that moment comes, because I'll know it when I see it. I just don't think it's going to be here.
I have to agree with you all the way around. My issue with this fight is, of the 12 wins Paul Craig has, all of them are finishes, 11 by submission. He's not a knockout puncher. He's not the kind of guy who's going to test the chin of Mauricio Rua and show us that Mauricio Rua has been through too many. Shogun isn't the same guy. His chin is gone. Paul Craig's just not the kind of guy to test those things. On the ground, Rua still has a black belt, can still move well, still has submission defense. So it's one of those things where the cliff may be coming soon. And it could be in this fight. We don't know. But I just don't think Paul Craig stylistically is the kind of heavy hitter like an Anthony Smith who can test the chin of Mauricio Rua early. any other fighter who is 6'4", 205 pounds, all of his wins by finish, that's a tough fight for Rua simply because we don't know what he has in terms of the tank because of all the wars he's been through, the injuries you mentioned. You know, can he brawl, take a good punch, and win? I don't think Paul Craig is a guy who's going to test that. So stylistically, unless Shogun Rua is a shadow of his former self, which could be, he hasn't fought in a year, we don't really know, I think he has enough in the tank to fight smart, be the veteran, stay savvy, stay out of the submissions, and beat Paul Craig.
Main event. I'm so torn for this fight. Jacare versus Jan Blachowicz. Jacare is going to make the move up after the loss to Jack Hermanson. He's fallen short of a world title in middleweight, and at this point, he's dropped 3 of his last 5, and when I went back over the record, I'm seeing more what I wanted to see than what was really there. I was at Jacare Brunson too, and I wanted Jacare to win the fight. I expected him to put up a little bit more of a performance against Kelvin Gastelum and win the fight, but I felt like he faded late. He then came back against Weidman. It just seems like, I hate to say it, but we take one step forward, we take a step back. Not 2, but 1. And it's hard to really get momentum going there. Certainly, when you look at the fight, he's got a better ground game, but he's generally stood up. I don't know if this is the fight that he wants to stand up with. To me, I look at a lot of people that are coming up in weight, and they're doing it because they basically need to reinvent themselves. You know, in Jacare's case, you know, he really has to do something to stake another title run because it wasn't happening at middleweight. He wasn't having issues making weight like we've seen with some other fighters. You know, Luke Rockhold, I know, struggled to make 185. I think that's very evident when you go back and even look against the win that he had. I'm trying to think of who it was against. David, come on, help me, Jimmy. David Branch, thank you. Yeah. His weight cut there was very evident.
Brutal. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, anyone that knows a weight cut looks at him during those weigh-ins and knows, hey, listen, man, he's had a tough time.
Look bad in Perth. Look bad in Perth against Yoel Romero, man, at the weigh-ins. He was sucked up. It's tough. It's a tough cut for him.
Yeah. So, you know, in a way, you almost look at that like, you know, he had to go. Jacare didn't have to go. He wanted to go because he needed to reinvent himself. And I know there's not a whole lot of knockouts on his record, but man, like, this is a guy that could put him on it. And a lot of times, you know, we look at fights like this and we go back and we say, well, man, he only lost to elite guys, right? Whitaker, Romero, Gastelum, those are elite guys. You know, do we want to put Jan Blachowicz in that elite conversation? I don't think I do right now, but I also feel like this is a very risky fight for Jacare, and I want him to win more than I feel like he is going to win. And those are always tough fights for me.
Yeah, very difficult. I just want to say, first off, personally, I really like Jacare. He did a seminar at my old jiu-jitsu gym. I got to train with him for a few weeks when he was in his jiu-jitsu prime, like Pan Am's 2004. Like that year, I mean, he was just amazing and got to know him well. Really good guy, really generous on the mat. And you know what I mean if you've ever done jiu-jitsu. He's a generous guy because he could rip your limbs out with one arm, especially back then. And so personally, I really like the guy. The problem is, if you look at his fights, were you there for you saw the Kelvin Gastelum fight live?
No, it's funny.
I called that fight.
Did I see that live? I don't think I did.
It was in Brazil.
It's funny you say that though. Jacare is one of the very few people I've ever, from, you know, the MMA landscape, taken a photo with. I met him after Johnson Reyes fought in Kansas City, and I had to take a picture with him. I broke my rule, and I said, this is Jacare. This man's a legend. I have to get a picture. So, yeah, no, I'm much more endeared to him. There's not many fighters that I'm that endeared to that I don't know or have an actual, like, personal background or history with. So, yeah, it's such a tough spot to be in when you know some of these people or you've looked at what they've done. You can't remove that, like, that emotional aspect from it. Like, I don't want this to happen. I don't want it to happen this way. But I'm not the matchmaker. If I was, I would have tried to give him a cupcake or a layup or something. Not Jan Blachowicz. I mean, give me a break. What are we doing here? This is Jacare.
Well, here's the issue for me. Is number one, I really like the guy personally. But if you look at his loss to Kelvin Gastelum, the loss to Hermansson, it's almost like he suddenly ran out of gas in the second round against Kelvin Gastelum. Hermansson, he never found his offensive rhythm, never got his takedown going. It was like it seems like tactical or mental, huge steps back. He looked great. Obviously lost the first 2 rounds against Chris Weidman, was able to get the knockout late, but it's always like one step forward and one step back since 2017. So you wonder if being forced up from 185, so let's keep this in mind. Rockhold, Weidman, Jacare were pushed out of 185. They didn't want to leave. They had to leave. And as you said, he's not a giant. He's not in trouble making 185. Big 185er, but not the biggest I've ever seen. Blachowicz, the problem we have here is he's a natural 205er. He has an excellent jab. I don't see any evidence that Jacare is going to physically have his way with him. Rockhold certainly did not. He's not a knockout puncher by any stretch of the imagination, but he keeps distance well. He's naturally big, good submission game in his own right. It's not just going to fall apart if Jacare gets on top of him. And he's really good at reading distance. And this is a 5-round fight. All those things together with Jacare's inconsistency over his last few fights and a new weight class makes me think Blachowicz just throws the jab over and over, keeps distance, keeps range, stops the takedown, which is Jacare's best weapon is jiu-jitsu on top, by the way, although he does have a tricky guard. And he expends a lot of energy going for takedowns from the outside, and it wears him down. And that Blachowicz uses his size, his jab, and his movement to stay on the outside and frustrate Jacare and wear him down. And he either wins by decision or he catches him late. I think Souza's extremely talented, but at 39 years old, I don't know if he has the gas and the tactical game plan to be successful against a natural light heavyweight in Blachowicz. I think it's a lot to ask of him.
You know what's crazy about that is I did not realize until just now that I have never seen a 4th and 5th round out of Jan Blachowicz, yet I have more confidence in him in a 4th and 5th round than I would Jacare.
That's how I feel too. Well, Jacare's also had trouble with his pacing. And we saw it against Gastelum. He had a great first round, and then he's out of gas in the second. Against Weidman, it took him a while to get going, and then got the knockout late. Against Yoel Romero, it took him a while to get going. He lost a close decision. He's had trouble pacing himself for 5 rounds, either starting too slow or starting too fast. And against Hermansson, he started too slow and never really got his rhythm. And it's been frustrating to watch him fight because of that. It's like he just hasn't put together those consistent rounds that you need to really be a standout.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not a jerk, so you can't, hope for his downfall, right? Like, you're not kind of watching. You don't look at him the same way you look at a guy like Greg Hardy, you're kind of waiting for it to happen. In this situation, man, it's such a tough thing. And like you said, the influx of middleweight to light heavyweight and the mixed results we've seen when, guys voluntarily go up because, hey, I don't want to make this 85 cut anymore. I'll go to 205 against the guys that get a little bit older, don't have quite the success, and say, okay, I'm going to go up to 205 because I don't have anywhere else to go in this division. That's just a different perspective. And I feel like a lot of people don't talk about that. They look at the move up as the same for everyone. It's not. The move up for certain people is not the same as the move up for Rockhold Jacare was. It's just not.
What does it tell you if a quarterback is playing wide receiver?
Some team is in trouble, Jimmy. Even my Colts wouldn't put Jacoby Brissett at wide receiver.
Right. You weren't a great quarterback, were you? You didn't move because you were, Tom Brady has never played wide receiver. Okay, you might be physically talented enough to play wide receiver. But the point is, why you are moving positions is hugely important. And Jacare is carrying a lot of weight into this fight. If Jan Blachowicz loses this fight, okay, he's out of the title picture for the time being, at least. His future in the UFC isn't really in jeopardy. He'll get another fight. I don't know about Jacare. Chris Weidman, him losing to Reyes. Reyes is a tough guy. He's getting the next title shot. There are a lot of people going, he needs to hang him up. Luke Rockhold, his last fight with Blachowicz, says he's not interested in fighting anymore. If you have your whole career at a weight class and you move up and you give it a shot and it blows up in your face, that could be the end of your career. That is the pressure Jacare is under. That is not easy to deal with. I don't care who you are.
No, I agree. I mean, it is since we're using football analogies, the proverbial Hail Mary. Because if it doesn't work, you can't go back down. Like, you just left. You know what I mean? Like, that looks even worse. And you can't go any higher because you can't sustain yourself at 205. It's a desperate move for the person moving up, and it's a massive opportunity for the person that they fight. Because, let's be fair. How many legends in sport is Jan Blachowicz really going to get a chance to knock clean out? Not many with the name and credentials of Jacare. Not at least within the next 2 years.
That's the way it is, man. It's an all or nothing kind of fight. And with the performances Jacare has had, where he hasn't been consistent, and a lot of that's mental. And to have extra pressure is the last thing he needs right now, but that's what he's got.
Well, if there's one person that I knew that could handle the pressure, it would be Jacare. But alas, we will have to see. We appreciate you guys checking this out, and we will be back in the week with more commentary.